Okay, so when I say the words powerful person, who pops into your head? Is it a CEO? A general? Someone with a really big fancy title? Yeah, we usually connect power with a position on an org chart. But what if I told you that one of the most powerful tools for influence has nothing to do with the name on your office door and has everything to do with whether people can actually trust what you say? So here's the game plan for this explainer. We're going to start by looking at the puzzle of power itself. We'll touch on the 5 official sources of power, and then we're going to introduce an unofficial one, credibility. Then we'll dive right into a really clever experiment that put it to the test and unpack what the, frankly, surprising results mean for you and me. All right, section 1, the puzzle of power. This really is the core question, isn't it? What truly makes someone influential? Is it just the title on their business card? Or is there something else going on? This is exactly what a fascinating 1993 study by Nestler and his colleagues wanted to figure out. But before we get to what they discovered, we need to get on the same page about the traditional ways we think about power. So to really get what the researchers found, we need a shared language. And for decades, the go-to framework for this has been French and Raven's 5 bases of power. Think of these as the official sources of influence, the ones you'd read about in a textbook. We're going to breeze through them pretty fast because the real magic is what comes next. First up, you've got reward power. This is the classic carrot approach, right? It's your ability to give out the good stuff. Bonuses, promotions, a better project for doing a good job. And on the flip side, you have its opposite, coercive power. This is the stick. It's influence that comes from the fear of negative consequences, like getting stuck with a terrible assignment or worse. Then there's legitimate power. This one's super straightforward. It comes directly from your title. You have influence simply because the org chart says you're the boss, and people feel like they ought to listen. Okay, now we get into the more personal types. Referent power. This is basically charisma. It's when people follow you not because they have to, but because they genuinely like you, they respect you, they admire you. And finally, we have expert power. This one's easy. It comes from being really, really good at what you do. People listen because you have the skills and the knowledge to solve the problem. You're the expert. So those are the big 5, the official ways to have influence. But the researchers behind this study, they had a hunch. They suspected there was another massive piece of the puzzle that was missing from this list, a factor they thought could be a source of power all by itself. And that factor was credibility. Now, credibility can be a pretty fuzzy word, but for this study, they used a very specific, very practical definition. Credibility isn't about being likable or having a fancy degree. It's simply the track record of matching your words with your actions. Do you actually follow through on your promises? Do you back up your threats? It's influence based on pure consistency. And this led them to their big question. They figured that a person with high credibility, someone who always does what they say they'll do, would naturally be seen as more powerful. But the real kicker was, could this effect be strong enough to compete with or even beat the power that comes from an official title? Well, to find out, they designed a really clever experiment. So how in the world do you test something like credibility in a controlled way? Well, the researchers created a whole fictional scenario. They introduced their study participants to a manager named Mr. Benny, who worked at the American Plastics Corporation. First, they messed with Mr. Benna's official, legitimate power. Some participants read a version where Mr. Benna was a full-on supervisor with the authority to hire, fire, and hand out raises. That was the high-power condition. But others read that he was just a senior employee filling in for his sick boss, with very limited authority. That was the low-power condition. Okay, now here comes the genius part. They manipulated his credibility. In the high credibility version, people were told Mr. Bennon has a track record of keeping his promises and making good on his threats about 90% of the time. In the low credibility version, that number plummeted to just 50%, basically a coin flip. Then, after reading their version of the story, everyone was asked to rate just how powerful they thought Mr. Bennon was. So, the stage is set. We've got a manager who is either high or low in formal power, and at the same time is either highly credible, not so credible, or a total unknown. So what happened? How much did his credibility actually matter? Well, the results were fascinating. First off, the main idea held up perfectly. You can see it clear as day in the data. It's like a staircase. Low credibility meant low perceived power, and high credibility meant high perceived power. So yup, being a person of your word absolutely makes you seem more powerful. But that's where the simple part of the story ends. Now, check this out. Look at what happened when Mr. Bennett had low formal power, when he was just the guy filling in. In that scenario, credibility was a massive deal. I mean, look at that huge gap on the chart. Being credible gave his perceived power a gigantic boost. It shows that when you don't have a title to lean on, your word becomes your greatest source of influence. But here is the big twist. Look what happened when Mr. Bennett already had high formal power. When he was the actual boss, credibility barely made a difference at all. Seriously, whether he was 90% credible or 50% credible, people saw him as powerful no matter what. It seems like his legitimate power, that title, was so strong that it just overshadowed his personal credibility. He was the boss, and that's all that mattered. And this just brilliantly highlights the study's main point, which the researchers themselves summed up perfectly. They said, managers with relatively low power should be concerned with their credibility if they ultimately wish to be able to influence subordinates. It's not just a nice to have, it's an absolutely vital tool if you can't rely on a title alone. So, what does this nearly 30-year-old study mean for us today in our own careers? Well, the implications are actually incredibly relevant. Let's just boil this all down. First, your credibility, your reputation for matching words with actions, is a direct source of power. It's not fluff. It measurably makes you more influential. Second, having a powerful title is, well, powerful, but it can also hide the importance of your personal credibility. And finally, and this is probably the most important one, credibility is a superpower for anyone trying to lead without formal authority. If you're a junior team member or an individual contributor, your word is your bond, and it is your single most potent tool for making an impact. So we'll end with this thought. An organization can give you a title, and that title grants you a certain level of authority. But real influence, the kind that inspires real trust and action, that isn't granted. It's earned, one kept promise at a time. So the question to ask yourself is, what is your word granting you?